Hi everyone. Uh, Welcome to the virtual session series where we have an interesting, very high quality project that we're going to be talking about today. It is live. It has built the solution that many others have promised. Hearing about interoperability for quite a few years, but thanks to this wonderful team that we're there already. So today we have the head of developer relations from this amazing blockchain project called Axelar. Essentially, Axelar is a blockchain that connects other blockchains. You'll see the Axelar team has built a working top quality solution that solves the problem of secure cross chain communication. An appropriate example to think of Axelar would be to imagine it as an air traffic control system that handles three things: transportation, routing, and customs or border control between blockchains. Let me explain it in the context of transactions or transfer of digital assets. So transportation here means the transfer of digital assets across blockchains. Routing means if the asset is getting transferred from one wallet to another, and suppose this is across blockchains or within the same blockchain, you'll be looking at routing this asset from the source to the destination. And then customs of ball essentially means message passing about the asset transfer between blockchains. So essentially this helps the team to build the a secure cross-chain messaging protocol. Essentially, security comes from using the battle tested proof of stake consensus to secure communication when it passes between blockchain. And, we have the wonderful Stephen Fluin, head of developer relations at Axelar, to talk more about Axelar with us. Let me welcome him to the conversation. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Stephen, I experimented with Axelar, a few months back, and when I really saw the solution working, I was excited to dive in deeper. So I was one of the few folks that got excited very early on. I remember meeting a team that was building within the Axelar ecosystem a DeFi project, and the way they explained to me about how the whole ecosystem works, it was very fascinating for me, and that's why we pushed further to get involved in the ecosystem. We spent some time to learn about it, and fortunately we got the opportunity to work with such a high quality team. But today I want to learn all about Axelar, and I want to use this opportunity to not just learn myself but also get our audience to learn about the wonderful things that Axelar has made happen for the whole ecosystem. So, Stephen, I think
Absolutely.
before we get in, why don't you introduce yourself? We'd love to learn about where you're coming from.
Sure. So I'll give the brief version of my introduction. So my name is Stephen Fluin, and I am head of developer relations here at Axelar. Now, developer relations is a relatively new discipline that's existed for a few years in technology. But the way that I define developer relations is really having a dual mission. The first half of the mission is really all about developer success. So trying to figure out who's out there and how can we make you successful, whether that is getting a new job, whether that is learning a new skill set, founding a company, getting funded, going to mainnet, all these different challenges. We want to figure out what you're trying to achieve and then figure out ways that Axelar can make that better, make you more successful in all the things you do. And the second half of the developer relations mission is really empathy. So understanding what it's like being a developer out there, being someone who's maybe new to Web3, new to interoperability, and helping you understand your needs so that we can reflect those needs onto the way that we build the product, the APIs we create, the products we ship, all the way to the way that we tell our story, and then all the way to the way that we educate and the way that we teach. So for example, on a day-to-day basis, I own things like our documentation and developer support processes. And so if you go to our docs and something is confusing or you don't come away with the answer you need, that's my fault. And I want to work with you to fix that. Before joining Axelar, I was over at Chainlink Labs for almost a couple of years, where I led the developer relations team over there. And before that, I was in the Web 2 space, working at Google, leading developer relations for a Web 2 product called Angular, which I know is very, very popular, especially in India.
Absolutely. Stephen, I think, I really relate to the idea of developer relations because I come from a background of coding myself. So back in 2016, when I first dabbled with the idea of building something on the Bitcoin blockchain, it was excruciatingly difficult or painful for someone who had no idea, what blockchains were about, was what's distributed environment really about, right? So I totally hear you when you say, the idea of helping developers through the process of not just, the early days of learning a new technology, but then continuously also helping build, documents that can help, other developers at scale to get onto the bandwagon or involved with the ecosystem. So I can totally relate to the idea of developer relations, but you have such a high quality, background. I think all of the companies that you've worked with, many folks in India, have it as a dream to work with these top companies. Working in Google and then coming into the blockchain ecosystem, what was the pull or what was the attraction factor for you?
Sure, sure. So I had been into Bitcoin and like cryptography and decentralized systems since around 2011. So
Wow.
that's when I started getting into Bitcoin and saying like, hey, wow, we can come up with a consensus system that everyone in the world can participate in and be part of, that comes out with a single definition of truth that then allows us to do things that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So I've been a big fan of the technology for a long time. And then, I mean, obviously with the rise of Ethereum and all the kind of programmable smart contract layer on top of that, that's where it becomes very, very exciting, where you can build things that you couldn't have built otherwise. And so to me, that was kind of what pulled me into the blockchain space, is just this idea that there's disruption going on. And I love the idea that the things that we're building in blockchain, the ways that we're empowering people to build new things can transform society, right? Like with Web3 and blockchain, you can build applications that wouldn't exist otherwise. So one of the examples I often pull out is I built a little like Secret Santa app,
Wow.
where Secret Santa is a process where you basically you get randomly paired up with one other person, you buy them a gift for a holiday. And the problem with doing this in a centralized system like Reddit, which is one of the most popular ones in the world, is they've now collected millions of individual addresses and correlated that with like Reddit usernames. And like, to me, it's probably okay, but I mean, we see every day that there's hacks and there's compromise and things like that. And if you could build an autonomous system where there is no centralized party that owns and controls that data, but it belongs more to the individuals, that's an example of an application that you couldn't build 10 years ago. And so the idea that there's a whole new way of building these same sort of applications, like solving the same sort of problems, but in a way that users have control, that has transparency, that has immutability, all those things just are really exciting to me, because I feel like it adds value to users and to developers.
Absolutely. I think, that is probably where, our audience is going to really empathize with you or relate to you because, most of us are here for the core principles where users have control not only of their data, but also of their assets, money, or essentially, the internet of money is what we call the world of blockchain, right? And you mentioned the right words when you looked at the ecosystem as disruption, or building something that's phenomenally different from the paradigms we were used to before blockchains came about. But again, when I look at the word disruption, I also am able to relate to your current role, because Axelar and the idea of interoperability, I think, I've been following the core concept since probably 2017, right? And for most parts, it seemed like a dream because there were so many complexities to building out the right solution, and now we have that with Axelar, right? So I would love to dive in to understand you know what what is it like to work with Axelar, and then what is it like to give this power of interoperability to the developers, to the builders that build on top of the Axelar network.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'll start off talking a little bit about the why I think Axelar is really exciting, and the kind of, I think, part of why the company exists today, which is I look back at the history of like smart contracts and blockchain. If you were getting into blockchain in 2017, 2018, things were actually much simpler. You had a very small number of chains. You had a very small number of technologies, right? Like go learn Solidity and ship to Ethereum was basically the answer
Yeah.
for everybody. But obviously, Ethereum has different trade-offs than a lot of the other blockchains we see today, and so we end up seeing more and more blockchains. And these new blockchains are all bringing something new and exciting to the table. But the challenge is fundamentally this paradox of choice, where we've gone from a world with like one or two blockchains up to hundreds or thousands. Right now, we have like lots of L1s, lots of L2s. We have app-specific chains, and all these things give developers choice and new capabilities and better trade-offs and new powers. But it comes at the cost of complexity, where if you are a newcomer into blockchain, you don't really know what to do, right? Like you're going to get pulled into one L1 ecosystem or an L2 ecosystem, and then kind of be stuck there and not see the forest for the trees of like that we're all working on this problem, we're all doing good work, and how can we benefit all of that? And so to me, Axelar is fundamentally all about that in terms of being a platform that lets folks build applications that are not necessarily restricted and build experiences for users that allow you to care a little bit less about which chain you're on at any given moment, or where your assets are, where liquidity is. And so these fundamental primitives of interoperability, being able to send messages, being able to send tokens between different blockchains, really enables an entirely new paradigm of how do you build an app? How do you not restrict yourself in the things you do? Because as a blockchain engineer, you end up having to figure out a lot of things. You have to figure out, okay, how do I, like, what do I do about security? What do I do about speed? Like, which blockchain is going to be the fastest one? Which blockchain is going to have the users I need? Which blockchain is going to have the liquidity I need? And we see a world where you have to care less about those individual choices, because you are able to take advantage of all these different things. And so, like, being able to be on a privacy preserving blockchain and storing NFTs, but then still be able to move them over to Polygon and list them on OpenSea, where the fees are reasonable, but you can like list and sell an NFT at the same time as maintaining all those sorts of privacy benefits. So that's kind of the world that we're tackling, is how do we build these primitives, but with a vision towards being this platform that allows you to do whatever you want and be successful across all these different chains.
That sounds very powerful, because imagine without this core value proposition, it would look like the banks that we interface with today would only remain siloed within their own user base, right? So think of the idea of having to interact with a particular merchant, or a restaurant, or anywhere, but you were only restricted if you had the access to a particular bank, right? Or if you were transferring money to your friend, but the idea was that it could only happen if you were within the same bank. That's what exactly the blockchain ecosystem looked like back then in 2017. And today exactly as you mentioned, we're taking the world from where from having that problem to you just utilize the idea of any use case on top of the blockchain, but you silo away the complexities of you know how things work, or which particular blockchain can interface with which other blockchain, right? So I think taking that complexity or limitation away, I think, is really powerful for the end user. And again, it is amazing that we have now as an ecosystem reached that milestone. um, Stephen, I would love to understand, in your daily journey, you interact with a lot of projects, right? So, what are some of the projects that you found very intriguing, or what were some of the early projects that got onboarded onto the Axelar network, and what were the use cases like that they were building?
Sure. So I'll call it a couple. One of the most well known and biggest projects that uses XLR is called Squid, And so Squid is a team that offers something that they call the Squid router. And so what they do is they leverage the Axelar network to go beyond just bridging assets between blockchain A and blockchain B, but offering integrated swaps and exchanging. So, like for example,
Mm-hmm.
the Squid allows you to move from any token on any chain that's supported to any other token on any other chain. And so what's
Mm-hmm.
happening there under the hood is they're doing this very intelligent routing where they're combining knowledge of like what tokens are on which dexes, what are the fees on each of those dexes, and finding the most efficient path to get you from whatever token on whatever chain you have to whatever token on whatever chain you have. And they think about this not just from the perspective of empowering users to do that, but they do it from the perspective of empowering developers as well. So they offer an SDK. And so like if you are a dapp developer and you want to accept all, like you only want to receive token X on chain A, right? You can do that. And what will happen is you can use the Squid's SDK and all these intelligent routing capabilities to accept any token from anyone, right? And then it really simplifies the journey for users because they don't have to worry about which chain they're on, which tokens they have. They can still pay and interact with the services that they want to, and still like leveraging and being a participant in this Web3 ecosystem. And so all of that is built on top of like the Axelar primitives of being able to send a message so that when the message is received with some tokens on the destination chain, it like can automatically go directly to the DEX and then do whatever swaps that you want via the automatic makers, and then like deliver that end result to you with very, very like little interaction from a user, right? You're just picking where am I coming from, where am I going to, and what do I want, and it kind of figures out everything under the hood in the most efficient route possible.
Absolutely. And so I think that also brings me to because we're talking about cross chain asset transfers, there is, I would love to dive in a little bit about the consensus mechanism Axelar is using and how secure is it to transfer these assets, because we've seen the idea of bridges to be compromised at the end of security.
Yeah. I mean, what is the statistic in like in the last 2 years, like 70% of all funds in DeFi have been compromised in some way. A lot of that, if you look at the data, like I read Rect news very frequently. A lot of the bridge hacks that have come before are victims of centralization, where you have a multi-sig that controls the network, and that multi-sig ends up getting compromised in some way, and then that compromises the ability to move tokens between chains and things like that. So the way that Axelar is structured is, as you mentioned, at the very head of things, it's a blockchain of interoperability. And so
Mm-hmm.
what ends up happening is, as a developer or as a user, when you create a transaction, let's say I want to send a message from BNB chain to Avalanche, for example,
Mm-hmm.
you call a gateway on BNB chain. Right, that is a gateway that is a smart contract that lives on the BNB chain that emits an event. And then what
Mm-hmm.
happens is a relayer or kind of any independent party will notice that transaction happened on the source chain. It will then submit that to the Axelar network and saying, hey, here is a message that is trying to be delivered. And then what happens is you have all of these different validators that are participating in Axelar's decentralized consensus. And so how that works is Axelar itself being a blockchain, it is a proof of stake blockchain with about 75 validators. And so all of these validators are not only running the Axelar blockchain, but they're also running local copies of BNB chain, of Avalanche, etc. And so when they see when this transaction comes in the Axelar network saying, hey, this transaction was originally on BNB chain, they are all asked, is this true? Go check your own local node, go check your own like version of that consensus on that separate chain, and then vote. And so all of these validators that support a given chain vote on chain. They sign those votes and they say, yes, this is truth. This happened on BNB chain. I know that
Mm-hmm.
those tokens were burned. And so then therefore it is okay to proceed with the moving to the destination chain, for example. So what will happen is they will all vote on chain, and then
Mm-hmm.
a relayer will take those signatures, pass them on to the destination chain, so Avalanche. And on that Avalanche gateway, it actually has knowledge of that network. It has knowledge of all the validators, it has knowledge of their stakes. And then it
Mm-hmm.
uses those stakes and the knowledge of those validators to verify those signatures, which then approves the execution on the destination chain. So you say, hey, I have burned these tokens on chain A so they can be minted on chain B. The whole network is going to vote and say, hey, did this actually happen? Is this truth? Not just
Mm-hmm.
like a claim from some individual. And then if that is truth, they're going to sign that message, which then that signature unlocks the minting on the destination chain. And so Axelar is really, really focused on security and decentralization as our fundamental mechanism for doing anything, where we don't want to be holding on to multi-sigs that can be compromised. We want to be and creating a network of validators that have stake, that have like invested, like put money on the line in order
Mm-hmm.
to show that these things are true and to secure the network.
Yeah, I remember, I think I'm not exactly, I can't, pinpoint the name, but one of the validators that I saw being active is someone that I saw being active within the Cosmos ecosystem. And then I saw the same validator being active in the Polkadot ecosystem as well as, in the Ethereum ecosystem. So it seemed like, the validator was well established in the ecosystems, and it was in their interest to ensure the security. So I do see where that whole ecosystem of ensuring uh, you know foolproof transactions are happening, sort of come alive to make this solution a reality.
Yeah, I mean, so we have this blockchain explorer called
Hmm.
axelarscan.io,
Hmm.
AXELAR scan.io. And this is one of the most fantastic blockchain explorers that I've seen, because not only does it have information on the transactions that are going through and the blocks that are being produced on XLR, but also has information on all the validators. So like you can see
Hmm.
the current validator set. You can see their stake, you can see all of their votes on chain, things like that. But not only that, you can actually dig into any of the transactions on the Axelar network and see kind of where was the message coming from, where was the message going to, what were all the who initiated it, what was the source contract, what was the destination contract, and it kind of is this like unified view of a very complex matter, right? Like when you are sending a message from chain A to chain B, it's complicated, right? There's a transaction
Yeah.
on the source chain. There is
Hmm.
that decentralized consensus coming from XLR to prove that this should happen on the destination chain. And then you have a couple transactions on the destination chain, both for the approval and for the execution. And so all of those, like to go and look at every individual block explorer would kind of be a pain. It would be very hard to do. But what we've done in
Hmm.
Axelar Scan is we've made it a single view. And so you can click into a transaction and see
Hmm.
that end-to-end path. You can see the gas that was paid, and then see how that gas is being paid to all of these different pieces of a full end-to-end multi-chain transaction.
And I have to compliment Stephen on the team's work, because having used it, and now I remember it was simply staking as a validator that I was referring to in this case. But while using it, the Explorer was very, I mean, there was clarity in communicating all of the things that one looks for in a transaction. So I'm completely with you on the Explorer being, helping solve this particular problem. But one problem that I've seen within the ecosystem was, everybody was used to the JavaScript ecosystem, and Solidity was something that directly had correlation in terms of syntax, and that made it easy for the Ethereum ecosystem to onboard folks from the existing widespread, I would say, the mean stack ecosystem. And you mentioned Angular, so I totally know that you can relate to that ecosystem as well. But now with Axelar, I would love to learn about what is the language, what are the other prerequisites that developers genuinely need to learn about, to get involved and build in the or on the Axelar blockchain.
Sure, sure. So I'll answer this question from two perspectives. So
Mm-hmm.
one from the developer perspective, and one from
Mm-hmm.
a relatively new perspective I call an integrator. So from
Mm-hmm.
a developer perspective, if you are building smart contracts that you want to send a message from chain A to chain B, the
Mm-hmm.
only technology you really need to learn is the language of chain A. So in that example,
Mm-hmm.
from sending a message from BNB chain to Avalanche, you really only need to learn Solidity or Viper, right? Like it's up to you.
Yeah.
But effectively, because BNB chain is an EVM chain, any transaction that or smart contract that you write that is capable of interacting with a gateway on BNB chain is capable of sending a message to anywhere in the Axelar network. So even though we support multiple blockchains with different tech stacks, so like we support Cosmos, we support EVM, and these have very different smart contract languages. You only have to worry about the source chain. If you're sending a message, you only have to worry about the destination chain if you're receiving a message. And so if you are sending, for example, a message from a Cosmos chain to another Cosmos chain, then you only need to worry about the Cosmos tech stack. And so you're writing CosmWasm if you're doing things at the smart contract layer. And so we really like it really depends where you want to be, and then we're handling the entire interoperability for you. So Axelar itself is built on the Cosmos SDK as well. So like the node software is built in Go. But most developers don't have to actually interact with Axelar at that layer at all. They just interact with the gateways. So most developers, I think like 70% of transactions are like EVM to EVM. And so there you're only learning Solidity, and then you're able to do everything on top of Axelar. So that's kind of the first response. The second response, and this is somewhat new and kind of very exciting, is Axelar is working on adding what we call the Axelar virtual machine, which is effectively smart contract support on the Axelar blockchain. So you can write application layer code rather than consensus layer code. So the consensus layer is the node that we're shipping and the software that all the validators are running. And then the application layer is whenever you build a smart contract on top of that all the validators are going to run. And the magic here, why we're so excited about the Axelar VM, is that this will allow folks to effectively self-serve and plug in new blockchains into Axelar. So before, in order for us to support a new tech stack or a new blockchain, we had to modify the parameters of the network. We had to modify the consensus layer somewhat. But now with this kind of moving into the application layer, it's going to be permissionless and self-serve. So you don't even need a network governance vote to upgrade the network. You can just deploy new smart contracts and they'll just start working. Which to me is kind of magical, because if you want to bring a new blockchain, so let's imagine you talked about the power of JavaScript, right? Like you've got Agoric, for example, which is a JavaScript-based blockchain. If you're able to build a gateway on your blockchain side of things and a CosmWasm gateway on the Axelar side of things, you can now create like an end-to-end connection where you plug into this network that gives you access to all of the other blockchains that you want to communicate with. And so to me, I think this is has almost unlimited potential. I mean, I'm really excited for a ton of different use cases. One of the crazy ones to think about that is once the Axelar VM is ready for prime time, you could effectively connect anything, any blockchain, any system. And so one of the things that I'm going to be doing is kind of a tech demo, and that I'm really excited about is building a kind of fake pseudo blockchain on top of Twilio for SMS messaging.
Wow.
And so then if I plug that into the Axelar network and make that available, you can now send an SMS from any blockchain, which to me like seems like a very cool idea. Or you can receive an SMS on any blockchain. And so that's not a solution that I've seen before in a kind of decentralized manner. And so the potential is unlimited.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've not seen. In fact, this seems like, an innovation on the side of telecom, because that's where the SMSs originally, or the direct phone calls originally, sort of belong. So I think on the telecom side of things, using blockchain to interact with each other, I don't think that direction has been explored much. I do see. I think from SMSs it could directly then go to emails, and emails could then be a lot more secure, spam free, right, than the original environments. And then I can also see that interaction itself can have a lot of other models, because if you see on the blockchain, there's this idea of not like on the internet, there's a lot of free interactions that happen, but on the blockchain it seemed like we're creating a new world wherein instead of preferring free transactions, we're looking at paying for every transaction but getting the right value, be it privacy, or be it your ownership or other value points for it, right? So I can totally see this whole new paradigm evolving over time. But this is super exciting, because I did not think of that. And then this coming from the idea of what you mentioned as the concept of integrators, right? I think it's super powerful. And then another point that I can see from the Indian developers or builders perspective is that both the chains, like for example, the Go ecosystem in India is massive, right? So if you look at the developer base that can immediately understand this ecosystem by learning about the differences that are core to this paradigm, but not the complexity of adding a new language. I think that is being solved in this case, and that's a superpower because I've seen new projects fail because of the complexity there was on the side of developers, right? And because of that, what ends up happening is that the initial set of teams that come on, it takes a while to get there, and then that I would say network effect takes a lot longer to kick in, and by that time you see these ecosystems falling a lot behind. But in the case of Axelar, I think this seems like a superpower that you've made it so convenient for the users to interact with. But again, Stephen, you mentioned the idea of this getting built along Axelar virtual machine, right? That sort of hints at there's a ton of things that you've already built, right? But I'm excited about the future, and especially because you've painted it so clearly for all of us, right? But what does the roadmap in the future look like? I'd love to learn for Axelar, and I'm sure developers can make decisions on that basis on when to get in, or if this is the right time to come in and experiment.
Sure, sure. So obviously we've got a very full roadmap, but I'll just call it a few things. I mean, obviously the for us, everything we do is based on a foundation of security and decentralization. But like we're also very strong in a lot of different ways, and we're trying to like double down on some of those. So number one, I would say is just the number of blockchains that we're supporting and
Mm-hmm.
integrated with. So if you take a look on Axelar Scan, that website I was talking about before, you'll see we're connected to 49 chains today. And so this is something that just keeps increasing kind of every couple of weeks, even prior to the launch of the AVM. And so to me, I look at the AVM as foundational to like, hey, how can we make sure that we're connected to all the blockchains so that you, for example, if you're building a new app chain, you could launch day one being connected to Axelar by the AVM and have access to users and liquidity and all these sorts of things that
Mm-hmm.
you might not have if you're just shipping an app chain and then like having to build everything from scratch. So I would say the both connectivity in general as well as the connectivity enabled by the AVM are some of the biggest things that you should expect to see in the future. The AVM itself, I think, is going to also offer another category. So when we ever talk about this kind of self-serve connection to the Axelar network via the AVM, we use the term interchain amplifier because
Mm-hmm.
it's amplifying this connectivity to the interchain universe. The second half of apps that are going to be enabled by the Axelar VM is really all about coordination. And so, for example, us having gateways on so many different blockchains, it's actually a big pain to, for example, even just update contracts on 20 different EVM chains. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things that we're working on is this Maestro service that effectively we want to make it easier for people to manage contracts that are out there for multiple blockchains. So whether that's deploying them all using the same address, all those sorts of things.
Wow.
Um, and then, I mean, just the last piece that I'll call it is just expanding the layer of services that like really just making the most common use cases easy on top of Axelar, right? Like we've talked about Squid and how they solve a huge
Mm-hmm.
problem for a lot of people. But we're also working on a bunch of different things. So we've got our interchain token service, which is the ability to kind of create either your own ERC20s that live on a bunch of different blockchains, have the same address, and have bridging built in, or
Mm-hmm.
connecting existing tokens that exist across different blockchains using the Axelar network, using kind of this central or this not centralized, this standardized infrastructure that
Mm-hmm.
again is decentralized, is on chain. For bridging assets, bridging tokens, et cetera.
Uh-huh.
So interchain token service is an example that's solving the kind of like fungible token side of the world. We also have a new interchain governance executor. So let's imagine you have a DAO that is like making decentralized decisions. Wouldn't it be nice if those decentralized decisions from your DAO can execute across multiple blockchains. And so we've built a set of tooling and a service that actually enables that. So when a proposal passes and gets executed, it doesn't just have to execute on the one chain. It can actually send messages to other blockchains and then execute the wills
Wow.
of and the choices of that governance proposal. So
Wow.
just trying to make everything easier, more connected, and better for developers.
Wow. I think Stephen, the use cases that you're just mentioning, it's kind of like boom. There's this whole new expansion of from where we were all, focusing on to, where the world's going to reach in immediately few years, if not months, right? So this is very exciting. I think for the developers, just learning about, what's to come, as you mentioned, interchain amplifier, the Maestro service, the integrated token service, right? And the key governance layer innovation that you mentioned. I think these are all very compelling, first offs that I don't think we've seen anywhere. So kudos to you and rest of the Axelar ecosystem to be so ahead in thinking and innovating for the whole ecosystem. And again, I feel like you know once you dive deeper into these individual chain ecosystems, and I was previously working at the Draper Dragon Fund, where we have invested in quite a few layer ones, right? We understood the idea of bringing in liquidity, right? Bootstrapping that for any ecosystem is such a major challenge, and unless that happens, you can't see dexes flourish. And if you can't see that happen, then the applications don't see enough user base, because then every order or every transaction does not have enough back end market making or connection for it to work, right? So I believe this solves that for a lot of new younger ecosystems that are going to come up, very specialized in their nature. And when I interact with builders in the Indian ecosystem, I see so many new ideas. And this is because we're looking from things from the aspect of developing countries, right? For example, when layer 2 happened because of Polygon from India, and we were very early to interact with them, but we could directly relate to the idea of how high value these transactions for the end user in India, right? So I think from that perspective, I see a lot of such examples coming in from all across the world, right? Because there are just so many, such a large audience that is now coming in, right? And because of that, I feel we're going to come up with these solutions that you're sharing are going to become very useful. But again, just being cognizant of time, I'm going to wrap it up with just asking you this one final question about your plans for India, because I see that Axelar has already interacted with Indian developers through multiple communities, multiple organizations already, and I'm glad that we're doing this. From the perspective of blockchain India as well. But what are the plans to attract more builders from India? Would love to learn a little bit about that.
Sure, sure. So I'll just mention a couple things. So number one, a lot of the initiatives that we do are trying to welcome in our global community. So for example,
Hmm.
we're going to be sneak peek here. We're likely going to be running our very first like Axelar Run hackathon around
Wow.
February of next year, and that will be a global
Lovely.
one that everyone's welcome
Hmm.
into. But then when it comes specifically to India, I mean, to me, like India has such an important like heritage of software engineering and computer science
Hmm.
that anything we can do to be here for you is critical. And so
Hmm.
one of the things that I would really want to do is we are trying to establish more communities and more support for local
Hmm.
communities. And
Hmm.
so like I would kind of just open the door to folks and say, hey, if you are like running any sort of community, connecting, helping people in any way in India, please reach out to us. Like we want to support you and
Hmm.
find ways to help you and kind of multiply all the efforts you're doing and empower you with content,
Hmm.
support, all those sorts of things. So I would say like, yeah, Indian developers are critical to the future of everyone basically. And so anything we can do to not just help individuals there, but if you're organizing communities, like we want to keep doing more of that.
Absolutely. And where would be the right point to reach out to you? Would be great to for the audience to learn.
Sure, sure. You know what? I'm gonna go all the way. You can just shoot me an email. So it's Steven@Axelar.network. So pretty easy to remember. But yeah, shoot me an email and let's see if see how we can support each other.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just going to put that, on the screen so that everybody can see it. Right. So I think with that note, Stephen, I know we're hitting time, I'm glad that you took out, and I heard from the team that you were traveling. So I'm not sure which part of the world are you in right now, but amongst the travel, and I'm sure there's a lot of chaos. You were able to do this. It means a lot to us at Blockchain India. So thanks for taking out time. But any final notes you want to share, feel free to do so. Otherwise, again, I really appreciate your time.
No, wait, we're just excited to see what you'll build.
Absolutely. So I think a good touch point would be reaching out to Stephen at the email that you can see on the screen. Stay tuned for the hackathon, which Stephen mentioned is to happen in February, and it's going to be a global event. So I'm sure anybody that participates is going to learn a lot because one key thing that I've seen with my experience with being involved with hackathons since 2015 is essentially that there's just a lot of ideas that are thrown around, and you tend to understand how a lot of these are architected, and that springs in new ideas as well, right? So if you just want to expand your learning about the blockchain ecosystem, that's great, but otherwise Axelar is such a promising ecosystem. The innovation, as you heard from Stephen, is so powerful, right? So for that aspect, I feel it is a must event for you to participate. Again, thanks, Stephen, and let's also thank all the audience across the various channels that have already seen it live or going to participate by watching it later at a convenient time. Axelar is a very promising ecosystem. I'm looking forward to how that enables new use cases, and some of them we heard from Stephen today, but a lot of those are going to be built by you. And I would hope so that a lot of Indian builders contribute to innovation that the users in the world benefit from. So, with that promise and with that positive note, I'd like to thank everyone. Thanks again, Stephen, for taking out the time.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Perfect. Goodbye. Thanks, everyone.